Is this how a normal person sits?
That looks quite casual, yeah.
Yeah, okay.
Yeah. Not sure what you're doing with your hands, though. No.
I am here at the Australian Permaculture Convergence with Tiani Adamson. Tiani, thank you for joining me. Would you like to share about who you are and some of the amazing projects that you're involved in?
Sure. So my name's Tiani Adamson. I'm a Khareg woman and a wildlife conservation biologist. I work on a variety of projects. So I'm the lead community engagement officer at CH4 Global, which is an industry that works with sustainable agriculture, utilising a macroalgae called Asparagopsis. Yeah, really incredible work. We work at the moment with beef feedlots to reduce methane output in those systems, and we reduce their methane by up to 90%. I'm also the seed state coordinator here in South Australia, which I've been doing voluntary for about 6 years. Seed's a really incredible organisation. It's the first and only youth climate justice movement, all run by mob and for mob, so First Nations run. And we look at projects that heal country and are influenced by the knowledges and wisdoms of First Nations people, young people, and influenced by the knowledge of our elders as well. Yeah.
Thanks, beautifully summed up. And you mentioned healing country. I know that's something that's very important to you. Can you share more about that?
So healing country, I guess to start with, as First Nations people, we don't see ourselves as separate from country, just country expressed in a human form. So the earth and the waterways, the plants and the animals and human beings are all a part of country, and it includes all aspects of the environment shed in different ways. So when we talk about healing country, First Nations people have looked after and managed this land since time immemorial. Every grain of dirt, every water system was looked after with great care and intention, all by First Nations land management. And our ability to maintain in this space and continue to heal and nurture country is a knowledge system that we've had embedded within us culturally, as well as through, normal science, traditional science. Over the last 230 something years of colonisation, it's been a cultural part of our law that's been taken away from us, our ability to heal and work with country. And it's really important now that we come back to First Nations wisdoms and knowledges that nurture and look after and heal country. We know that 83% of our biodiversity is actually looked after by First Nations people, despite the impacts of colonisation that have taken away from that. So really important now in 2023 that we make sure that we're letting First Nations people to get out of the way of First Nations people and let them drive the cars and the buses that facilitate healing country, and utilising those ancient knowledge systems that know how to manage the earth that we live on.
You spoke about people getting out of the way to allow First Nations people to have the greater ability to do the healing that is needed for our country. I know that you say that environmental justice and social justice are linked. So can you talk a bit about that and how that links in with your ability to do that healing?
So there is no climate justice without social justice or First Nations justice, without the healing of our Indigenous peoples, and without that cultural integration together as a nation to come together and heal what the destruction that's been there. We're not going to be able to heal the land that we're on. So we can't surge forward in systems like permaculture and in healing for country without actually having First Nations people and the relationship between cultures being healed themselves, and without the healing of First Nations people as well. So allowing or getting out of the way of First Nations leadership and bringing that to the forefront of these conversations is a critical way for us to be able to lead that, and embedded within changing that First Nations and social justice and changing these systems so that our people have a seat at the table, which, traditionally the tables were all First Nations people here in Australia. And so changing the narrative to have our mob represented and have our voices heard and being back in these spaces facilitates that healing of country and facilitates the healing of Australian culture in general as well.
And being at the Convergence today, how do you feel like the permaculture movement and community is adopting these things you're talking about and providing space and seats at the table for First Nations people?
Thank you. So APC has been really great with the convergence this year. They have carved out pay the rent tickets for First Nations people, which is really incredible, so that the accessibility barriers that have been there, whether that be, a social barrier or a wealth barrier or an accessibility barrier, that APC is funding tickets for First Nations people to be able to attend, which is really fantastic. Also having lots of First Nations people within the discussions that are being had. So having that narrative coming from the mouths of the people that have that lived experience and talking about their own culture and customs. It's also been fantastic within the first 2 or day and a half. Last night was a bit of a festival of hearing people who are not First Nations highlighting the relevance and the importance of listening to our mob and our people. There's also been space carved out for Seed to be able to have a stall and have conversations and yarn with people about the work that we do and the campaigns we have to heal country. A beautiful welcome this morning by Paramonk mob, which was really nice as well. And then on top of that, any tickets that have been cancelled from people being unwell have also gone to more First Nations people to have that option to attend. So really beautiful and inclusive.
And for people watching at home, how can they further support First Nations people to have voice and agency and sovereignty in what they're doing in the world?
So self-education is probably the most important and easiest one. There's such an abundance of resources available about learning, whose land you're on, what the proper name for the place that you're in. This place is called Yuktunga, but it's known as Mount Barker. Adelaide, the city, is actually Tandanya, so knowing those and revitalising language, educating yourself in that, and then educating others by utilising the language and reviving that language back, making sure that acknowledgements of country are done. That's an age-old traditional practice that we've always done. We've always welcomed people onto our country when people arrive on our country, and we've always acknowledged other people's country when we arrive as well. There's lots of other things like being able to pay the rent, so potentially donating some money across to organisations such as Common Ground or Seed, which APC has done a really amazing part of pay the rent, where their profits, I think 20% of their profits are going to Seed, which is really significant and really helpful for our group. So really fantastic. So that education, being able to pay the rent, sharing knowledges, and then ensuring that any spaces and systems that people are in is carving out that space for First Nations leadership, having voices ingrained through the spaces that people are in, having seats at the table, making sure that the wisdoms and knowledges are being embedded properly.
Thank you for taking the time with us today and for sharing your wisdom and your energy, and for educating us here and at home about how we can support First Nations people.
Thank you.